I just faced my worst nightmare. Not a storm, not the sea itself, but something far uglier. It came at dawn, sliding into my harbor like a thief in broad daylight. A yacht, gleaming white, 3 decks high, polished like a wedding cake, eased up to my grandfather's dock as if it owned the place. The engines hummed with that smug kind of wealth that doesn't ask permission. I stood on the porch, coffee steaming in my hand, salt wand in my face when they came off that boat. 3 of them, 2 in suits, the kind of thin city cloth that never saw a drop of brine in its life, and a third man with a leather briefcase clutched like a weapon. A lawyer. They didn't look at the water, they didn't look at the sky, or the gulls wheeling overhead, or the old timbers of the dock that had stood against 70 winters. They looked only at me, as if sizing up an inconvenience. The one in front, tall, tan, wearing sunglasses even in the gray morning light, lifted the briefcase, snapped it open, and pulled out a neat sheaf of papers. His voice carried across the water, smooth and sharp. "Sir, this dock is now part of Harbor Commons, filed and recorded as of last week. Your access ends today." Just like that. My family's dock, the one my grandfather built board by board in 1952, reduced to a clause on a page. I didn't answer, not yet. The words caught in my throat like a fishbone. The taller suit smirked, gesturing toward the weathered pilings beneath their glossy shoes. "Unsafe, out of code. Community project will replace it. You'll thank us someday." Behind him, the yacht idled, its reflection glittering on the tide, arrogant and loud against the quiet little cove. The gulls screamed overhead like they knew an invasion was underway. I sipped my coffee, slow and steady, let them think I was calm. Inside my chest, though, the tide was rising, because I knew something those men in suits didn't. This dock wasn't just wood and nails, it was blood and memory. A promise passed down, and if they thought a few pieces of paper could wash that away, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The harbor has a smell you never forget. Salt and pine, diesel and fish guts, sunlight baked into creosote pilings. It gets under your skin and stays there. Folks who only pass through think it stinks. Folks who belong here, we breathe it like church air. From my porch I can see the curve of the cove, the sandbar that juts out like a bent finger, the gulls drifting on the thermals. Out beyond that, nothing but the steel-gray expanse of Lake Michigan. On good days it's flat as a mirror, on bad days it rears up like an angry god. Today it was calm, deceptively calm. That dock they tried to steal, my grandfather built it with his own hands. Oak beams hauled down from the ridge, iron spikes blackened from the forge, rope burned from salt and time. He drove the pilings in during the summer of '52, standing waist deep in the shallows with nothing but a hammer, a borrowed skiff, and stubbornness. Folks laughed at him back then, said the lake would chew it up and spit it out, but winter after winter, storm after storm, it held, stronger than the shiny prefab piers that came later. My grandfather had a saying. He always had sayings. This one he'd mutter whenever the waves slammed hard against his handiwork. "The sea takes what you don't hold on to." That's why he never let go, and why neither will I. When I was a kid, this dock was my world. I learned to tie a cleat hitch on those weathered planks, learned to throw a crab pot, learned to balance on the railing and dive into water so cold it made my teeth ache. My grandfather's voice was always there behind me, steady as the tide. "Keep your feet under you, boy. The lake doesn't forgive stumbles." He's been gone 20 years now, but some mornings I still hear him in the groan of the timbers and the slap of water against the pilings. That dock is more than a stretch of wood. It's the heartbeat of this place. And that's what those men in suits will never understand. They think it's real estate, a line item on a ledger, a tract on a map. They don't see the hands that bled to build it, or the boots that wore smooth grooves into its boards, or the way the sun sets between the 2 end posts in late July, painting the whole cove in fire. They don't see legacy, they see leverage. This harbor, this little patch of Michigan coast, was supposed to stay quiet. That's why my grandfather settled here. He could have gone inland, bought more acres for less money, but he wanted the water, the stillness, the sound of gulls instead of traffic. He wanted a place where time moved slow, where neighbors nodded from their porches instead of honking horns. For decades, it worked. Nobody bothered us. Nobody even cared what sat out here at the edge of the map. Then came the new money. Weekenders from Chicago buying up summer homes. Developers sniffing around, seeing dollar signs instead of driftwood. And now, a yacht at my dock. Men with briefcases, lawyers citing community projects. They want to turn this ridge into a marina, a polished playground for people who will never know the bite of a December gale, or the joy of pulling a net full of perch before dawn. I set my empty coffee cup down on the porch rail, running my hand along the grain of the wood, weathered, scarred, still standing. This place is not theirs to take, and if they think I'm just some stubborn man clinging to rotten boards, they're about to learn how deep these roots go. The first shot wasn't fired from a boat or a gun. It came in an envelope, a neat white letter, HOA letterhead embossed in blue ink, Sable Shores Homeowners Association. The words dripped with polite menace. According to them, my dock was out of compliance with community safety standards, a hazard, a liability, a stain on their vision of a unified coastal aesthetic. I read it once. Then I used it to start the fire in my wood stove. The second letter arrived a week later. Same tone, same veiled threats. Only this time, they included photographs, my dock, my boathouse, even the pile of rope coils stacked by the shed. They'd circled the problems in red ink like a schoolteacher grading homework. Remove the dock voluntarily, it said, or the association will pursue corrective action. Corrective action. I laughed out loud when I read that phrase. Then I tore the letter in half, fed it to the flames, and poured myself a whiskey. I thought that was the end of it. I thought wrong. 2 weeks later, I woke to the sound of hammers. Not the rhythmic beat of a neighbor fixing a fence. No, this was sharp, metallic, alien. I stepped out onto the porch and saw them. 3 men in neon vests and hard hats, pounding stakes into the gravel at the head of my dock. Bright yellow survey flags fluttered in the wind, stabbing into the earth like little insults. I didn't call them. I sure as hell didn't invite them. "Morning," one of them shouted, cheery as a salesman. "Just marking the new easement lines." Easement. The word hit me like a punch. I walked down the path slow, boots crunching on the gravel. Didn't smile, didn't wave, just stood there, hands in my pockets, watching. They avoided my eyes, kept working, tap, tap, tap of stakes going in, flags flapping like victory banners on stolen ground. One of them muttered something about Harbor Commons project. Another said, "Orders came from the HOA." I said nothing. My silence made them nervous. Eventually, they packed up their gear and drove off in a county truck, leaving behind a neat row of yellow flags marching across my land. I stood there a long time after they left, staring at those flags. Each one was like a declaration of war, a bright little lie planted in the soil. When the wind picked up, the flags snapped and popped against the gray sky. I wanted to rip them all out, burn them in a pile, scatter the ashes. My fists clenched, my jaw ached from holding back the words boiling inside, but I didn't touch them, not yet. Because flags like that aren't just markers, they're bait. And sometimes the smartest thing a man can do is let the bait sit, let the trap spring tighter around the fool who set it. I walked back up to the porch, my boots heavy with gravel and salt, sat down in my grandfather's old chair, looked out at the lake, calm and wide and waiting. This wasn't about safety codes. This wasn't about paint colors or aesthetics. No. This was about taking, about pushing, about seeing how much I'd let slide before I pushed back. And as the gulls screamed overhead and the yellow flags whipped in the wind, I made a quiet promise. They'd pushed far enough. The next move would be mine. I didn't pull the flags, but I sure as hell took pictures of them. Every stake, every inch inside my line, time-stamped and saved. Then I called the only person I trusted to make sense of it, my sister, Paige. She picked up on the first ring. "Don't tell me? More of Karen's friends?" Her voice, dry as ever. Paige works down at the county recorder's office, which makes her more dangerous than a lawyer or a cop. She has the keys to the filing cabinets, the servers, the paper trail. "Survey crew this time," I said. Left me a row of flags like birthday candles. I could hear her typing already, her nails clicking on the keyboard. "Hold on," she muttered. "Yeah, there it is. Filed this morning. New survey map for your parcel, submitted by something called Blue Horizon LLC. Never heard of them? Of course not. Nobody has. Company registered last month. Mailing address is a P.O. box in Lansing. It's a ghost, but the filing matches exactly where you said those flags are. My stomach went cold. So, they're not just bluffing. They're trying to rewrite the map. Exactly. Legally slice off the dock and front lot. She sighed. Cole, this isn't an HOA nuisance letter anymore. This is a land grab. I leaned against the porch post, staring out at the dock, the yellow flags flapping like teeth in the wind. Who's behind it? Her keyboard rattled faster, then a pause. Well, you're not going to like this. Guess who signed the HOA notices tied to the filing? I already knew the answer before she said it. Karen Sunshire? Bingo. I let out a long breath. She's not just playing HOA queen. She's using it as a crowbar. Paige's tone hardened. I dug deeper. Karen didn't just buy her house here for the lake view. She worked as a land acquisition consultant for a mining conglomerate out west. Her job was to pry land out of families who didn't want to sell. She's done this before, Cole. Many times. The pieces snapped together in my head. The HOA letters, the survey flags. The shiny yacht parked like it owned the place. This isn't about building a park, I muttered. Nope, Paige said. It's about resources. What's under the ground, what's offshore, whatever she's after, it's big. I rubbed my jaw, tasting salt in the air. Grandpa always said this ridge sat on iron veins. Thought it was just old-timer talk. Not just iron, Paige said. The geological maps show rare earth traces too. Strategic stuff. If Karen's connected to mining money, this isn't about your dock. It's about locking down the whole shoreline. I looked at the dock, weathered and scarred, the flags marching across it like an invading army. Suddenly, it all made 6 sense. Then my dock's the key, I said. Exactly. Without access through your parcel, the plan stalls. With it, they carve up the coast before anyone notices. I could hear her tapping again, frustration in every keystroke. Cole, you need to be careful. These people aren't HOA busybodies with rulers. They've got investors, lawyers, and hired muscle. They'll lean on you hard. I know. And Cole, her voice softened. They'll come back. Soon. I closed my eyes, hearing the gulls cry, the water slap against the pilings. They would come back. With more flags, more papers, more suits, more muscle. But they didn't understand one thing. This dock wasn't a line on a survey. It was my grandfather's blood, my childhood, my promise. And if they thought they could take it with paperwork and intimidation, they'd learn what happens when you corner a man who has nothing left to lose. The yacht came back 3 days later, not at dawn this time, but in the hard light of afternoon when the lake was bright and merciless. I heard it before I saw it, the throaty churn of engines built for show, not work. By the time I reached the porch, it was easing into my cove like a shark nosing into shallow water. And this time, the queen herself stepped ashore. Madeline Cross. She wore a scarlet raincoat over a white silk blouse, the kind of outfit meant to draw eyes even under a slate-gray Michigan sky. A gold brooch pinned at her collar winked in the sun. Her blonde hair was perfect, sprayed into submission against the lake wind. She carried herself the way generals walk through conquered cities, calm, unhurried, already convinced the land belonged to her. 2 men in suits flanked her, each holding tablets and folders like weapons. Behind them, 2 bulked-up security contractors followed. Tactical pants and tight polos, necks as thick as pilings. One had mirrored sunglasses that reflected the dock, back at me in tiny warped fragments. The whole crew stepped onto my grandfather's dock, as if they owned it. I didn't move. I stayed on the porch, leaning against the same cedar post my grandfather had set 60 years ago, one hand in my pocket, the other resting on the rail. Let them come to me. Madeline stopped halfway down the dock, heels clicking sharp against old wood, and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile wolves give before they bite. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Her voice was smooth, almost pleasant, but under it ran steel. "At last we meet in person." I didn't answer, not yet. She gestured toward the suits beside her. "We've been reviewing the new survey. As you've probably heard, your dock and part of your frontage now fall within the community easement. It's time we formalize the transition." The taller of the suits lifted his tablet, like a preacher holding up scripture. I could see my dock highlighted in red on the screen, carved out like a slice of pie. Unsafe, unmaintained, and improperly permitted, he said flatly. We'll be removing it and constructing a marina dock in its place. Modern, compliant, far safer. One of the security men shifted his stance, folding arms thick as ropes. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to deliver terms. I took a slow sip of coffee, said nothing. The silence stretched long enough that even Madeline's smile faltered. "Mr. Mercer," she said again, voice sharper, "this isn't personal, it's progress. You can either cooperate and be compensated, or stand in the way and face legal consequences. I would advise the former." Her investors nodded, rehearsed and stiff. I finally spoke, my voice low and steady. "This dock isn't for sale." The words hung in the salt air, heavy as iron. Madeline's eyes narrowed. "Everything is for sale. You'll see that soon enough." She turned then, motioning to her people, and they walked back down the dock toward the waiting yacht. Their shoes clicked on the planks, echoing like gunshots. Before stepping aboard, she glanced back at me one last time. That smile returned, but this time it carried something colder, a promise. I stayed on the porch, watching until the yacht swung wide and its engines faded to a distant hum. Only when they were gone did I breathe out, because now I knew. The HOA letters and survey flags weren't just tests. They were the opening moves of a siege, and Madeline Cross hadn't sailed into this harbor to negotiate. She'd come to conquer. When Madeline's yacht slid back out of the cove, I knew something permanent had shifted. The letters and flags were just paper cuts. Now she had stood on my dock in silk and gold, smiling like she already owned it. That wasn't a warning, that was a declaration. And if I wanted this fight on my terms, I had to get ready before she came back. Tess didn't ask why. She saw the look in my eyes and simply rolled up her sleeves. We dragged crab pots, a busted mower, and a heap of rusted anchors out of the garage until the floor was bare concrete. A sheet of plywood across 2 sawhorses became our table. On it, she arranged 3 monitors, a network recorder, and a mess of wires that only she could tame. The smell of dust and motor oil mixed with the sharp tang of solder as she bent over the setup, her ponytail brushing the keys. "Power, then eyes, then teeth," she said, her voice calm and steady, the same tone she'd used years ago, back when we were broke and fixing things out of scrap. By the time I came back with coffee, the cameras were already alive. One pointed down at the gate, another watched the porch, a third covered the dock, and a fourth hid inside an old buoy lamp down at the piling. On the screens, our world bloomed in 4 neat quadrants: gravel, timber, water. Nothing could move out there without us seeing it. "Local recording only," I told her. "If they cut the net, we still have proof." "Done," she said without looking up. Her fingers moved fast. 30 days retention, mirrored every night. Paige gets a backup copy. Next came the drone. Not some toy from the mall, but a heavy quad with a spotlight Tess had cobbled together from salvage, sheet metal, and stubborn genius. When she powered it up, the beam flared so bright it turned the far end of the dock into midday. The whine of its props filled the garage, high and hungry. We tested the overlay for the live stream, too. Tess had built a simple frame, Mercer dock, private property, not for sale, with a timestamp stamped bold in the corner and a scrolling banner linking straight to the county plat map. If they came at night, if they tried to twist the story, the world would see the truth as it happened. By dusk, we had added more layers. Floodlights mounted on the eaves, a marine horn wired to a switch, and an outdoor speaker tied to a microphone so my voice could roll across the cove like a thunderclap. I tried it once, speaking low into the mic. "You are trespassing on private property. Your actions are being recorded." The sound carried so far a pair of gulls lifted off the piling and vanished into the gray sky. But the heart of our defense sat in the boathouse, the old diesel winch my grandfather had anchored in concrete 40 years ago. Its cable was as thick as my thumb, its engine still faithful after decades. I primed the choke and started it. The rumble filled the floor and my chest with vibration, a steady, patient thrum like a giant clearing its throat. We routed the cable through the hidden slot in the wall, out to a steel anchor sunk beneath the dock. If they brought trucks to rip the gate out, they'd be pulling against a machine designed to drag trees off mountainsides. "Your granddad would like this," Tess said softly as she watched the line go taut, humming with quiet power. We cut the engine to save fuel. The smell of hot diesel lingered in the air, sharp and comforting. Everything felt ready. Tess labeled the toggles with neat block letters: horn, floods, drone, winch. I stood back and looked at the table. It didn't look like much, just plywood and wires and switches. But in that moment, it felt like a fortress. We ate standing up at the workbench: cold chicken legs, 2 apples, bottled water. Neither of us said much. Outside, the lake darkened from steel to slate, then to ink. By 9 o'clock, the gulls had gone silent, the horizon fading into storm clouds gathering in the west. The first low rumble carried across the water like a warning. Tess pulled on an old army sweatshirt and tied her hair back tight. She sat at the monitors, posture straight, eyes locked on the feeds. I poured coffee into a thermos and set it beside her. The horn waited under the porch, the drone crouched on its pad, the winch cable hidden like a coiled serpent. "What if they have a warrant?" she asked finally. "Paige is watching filings," I said. "If a judge signs anything touching our parcel, we'll know in minutes. Tonight, they're bluffing. And if they cut the power?" I looked at the generator in the corner. "Then we turn the night into day." We made a slow walk of the property, checking every latch, every tripwire, every camera's faint red glow. The wind picked up, bending the pines until they whispered and moaned. Rain smell crept through the air, damp and electric. Back inside, the monitors glowed against the dark, the only light in the room. 4 silent witnesses, waiting. I stood by the switches. Tess's hands hovered near the mouse. Outside, the lake lay flat and black, the dock an empty line pointing into nothing. "The sea takes what you don't hold on to," I whispered, repeating the words my grandfather had carved into me. Tess's eyes stayed on the screens. "Then we hold," she said. And we did. Through 10. Through 11. Through the first fat drops of rain hammering on the boathouse roof. Every second stretched thin as wire, every sound sharpened by waiting. We knew they were coming. We just didn't know when. The storm arrived first. Wind lashed the ridge, bending the tall pines, shaking the house like a drum. Rain hammered the tin roof until it sounded like machine gun fire. The night was alive with noise, yet beneath all of it, I caught another sound. A low, steady growl, headlights crawling up the county road. "They're here," Tess whispered. On the monitor, 2 black trucks appeared, parking in the same spot they'd used before, but this time they killed their lights. A sedan followed, nose down, water sliding off its hood. The Realtor again, huddled behind her clipboard, soaked to the skin, but unwilling to miss the show. The figures emerged, 2 suits, 2 heavy security men. They didn't hesitate. They moved up the driveway, heads low against the rain, bolt cutters glinting under the occasional flash of lightning. The gate creaked when they pushed it. It swung open a few inches until the loose chain caught. They saw the padlock hanging there like an afterthought. Easy pickings. One guard lifted the cutters, jaws ready to bite. That's when the little alarm tripped. A chirp in the workshop, sharp as a sparrow. "Now," I said. Tess clicked her mouse. The drone rose into the storm with a silent whine, spotlight snapping on like the hand of God. The yard exploded in white. The men froze, blinded, caught mid-step in the beam. Rain glittered in the air around them like shards of glass. At the same time I threw the switch. Floodlights roared to life. Horns screamed across the cove. The world went from black to unbearable brilliance in an instant. The suits staggered back, hands up against their faces. One guard cursed and covered his ears. The other aimed his pistol skyward and fired at the horn. The second blast drowned under thunder. My voice rolled through the speaker, calm, steady, amplified against the rain. "You are trespassing on private property. Your actions are being recorded and broadcast live." They faltered. I could see it. The shift from arrogance to confusion. They hadn't come for a fight in the light. They'd come for a quiet removal, a quick show of force. Instead, the storm itself seemed to side with me, lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the dock beneath their feet. One of the suits yelled something at the others, his words lost in the storm. He pointed toward the truck. A decision was made. The bigger guard broke into a run, mud flying, boots pounding back down the driveway. A moment later, the roar of the Ford F-350 cut through the rain. Its lights flared bright, tires spinning as it reversed hard toward the gate. "They're going for brute force," Tess said. The driver threw a heavy chain from the bed. The men hooked it around the iron gate, linking my grandfather's work to the snarling machine. The truck screamed, wheels spitting mud, straining to rip the posts from the ground. The gate groaned, hinges screeching under the pressure. I felt the moment like a punch to the gut. They were tearing at more than steel. They were tearing at history, at the bones my grandfather left me. But I was ready. I flipped the breaker, and the diesel winch came alive with a thunder of its own, a slow, relentless rhythm against the chaos. The cable drew taut, humming, anchoring the gate to the earth itself. The truck howled, its engine screaming in redline fury, but the gate held, a duel in the storm, horsepower against legacy. For a moment, it was dead even. Then the Ford's tires spun uselessly in the mud, water spraying high. The driver let off, engine coughing, hood trembling with the effort. My winch chugged on, steady and immovable. The men stood in the floodlights, soaked, defeated, staring at the steel cable that had appeared from nowhere to ruin their plan. And then, out of the second truck, a new figure emerged. An umbrella opened against the rain, black and defiant. A scarlet raincoat caught the light. Madeline Cross. She walked forward through the mud like a general on campaign, her face carved into ice, her eyes locked on my cabin. Her men clustered close, miserable and wet, but she alone looked energized by the storm. This wasn't the end of their raid. It was only the beginning. She came into the light like she owned it. Rain hammered down, her black umbrella shaking in the wind. But she walked as if the storm parted for her. The red raincoat clung to her shoulders, the kind of garment you buy in New York, not at a bait shop. Her men closed ranks, shielding her like bodyguards around royalty. Madeline Cross, HOA president, ex-corporate shark, now queen of this soaked little hill. She had waited in her truck, letting her pawns take the first bruises. Now, with her gate chained to my winch and her men dripping in the floodlights, she stepped forward to take the board herself. She stopped 5 feet from the porch camera. The rain slicked her face, but her eyes never left the lens. She knew exactly where to stand, close enough to be seen, close enough to be heard. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice cutting through the storm, cold and precise. "This is over. You've had your fun with your gadgets, your lights, your theatrics. But it ends tonight." Her tone was pure condescension, the same she'd used in her letters about my grass, only sharper, laced with threat. I leaned into the mic, my words booming from the porch speaker. "Get off my property, Madeline." She tilted her head, smirk curling on her lips. Then she raised her phone, screen glowing through the rain. "This isn't your property anymore," she said. "The survey has been filed and accepted. The easement is official. This land is now under the authority of the Sable Ridge Homeowners Association." The guard shifted, hands resting on holsters. One suit looked nervous, chewing his lip. The other stared at the ground, refusing to meet the camera. I let her hang there, her phone aloft like a holy relic. Then I answered, calm and clear. "Filed, yes. Flagged, not accepted." County recorder put a hold on it the second it hit the system. For the first time her expression faltered. Just a flicker, but I saw it. Her jaw tightened. She recovered quickly, lowering her phone and taking a step closer. The umbrella twisted in the wind, almost flipping inside out. She didn't care. Her words came low, almost intimate, like a deal whispered across a boardroom table. "Listen to me, Cole. You're a squatter on land that's no longer yours. We have the right to remove you. But I'm generous. Take what you can carry, walk away tonight, and I'll cut you a check. $5,000 for your trouble. That's more than fair. $5,000. For a ridge worth millions. For a cabin built by my grandfather's hands." I almost laughed, but instead I let the silence do the talking. Finally I spoke, voice hard as the rain. "My land is not for sale, and you're trespassing." Her mask cracked. The smirk vanished, replaced by a snarl. "You have nothing. Do you understand me? Nothing. One man in a wooden shack against a multi-million-dollar project. The law is on my side. The money is on my side. You cannot win." She jabbed a finger toward the camera, her words riding the thunder. "We tried being reasonable. Now we're done. We will move you by force if we must. And when we do, the sheriff will arrest you for obstruction. No one will help you. No one will even know what happened until it's over." The guard on her left unfastened the strap on his holster. Not subtle, a promise. I let my voice fall lower, calm, unshaken. You love paperwork so much, Madeline. Let's look at some. Her eyes narrowed. She hadn't expected that. I stepped out of the garage into the downpour, carrying the green metal ammo can. Rain plastered my shirt to my skin, but I didn't care. I walked to the hood of their truck, each step lit in the floodlights, each one measured. Tess watched from the window, unseen, her rifle steady. The security men stiffened, ready. But I didn't carry a weapon. I set the ammo can down with a heavy clang, the sound echoing over the storm. Their eyes followed my hands like predators waiting for a move. I unlatched the lid, pulled out a clear plastic tube, and slid the old vellum map free. The storm pressed close, thunder grumbling over the ridge as I unrolled the sheet across the wet metal hood. The ink glistened under the rain, thick lines and careful notes drawn by my grandfather's steady hand. This, I said, voice carrying through the speaker, is the original plat map for this ridge, hand-drawn, filed, and recorded 60 years ago by the county's chief surveyor, my grandfather. I traced the bold line that marked my property, anchored by the split oak and the granite boulder. Then I pulled a pink flag from my pocket, still muddy from the ground, and slapped it onto the map. And this is where your fake survey puts the line, 50 feet inside my land. A fraud. A felony. The suits leaned in to spite themselves, eyes flicking from vellum to flag to Madeline. They understood instantly. One swallowed hard. The other stepped back, boots sinking deeper into the mud. I wasn't finished. My sister works at the recorder's office. She scanned your fake filing the moment it hit her desk. She also scanned this. I tapped the map, rain dripping from my finger. She's been on the phone with the sheriff for the last hour. The color drained from Madeline's face. For the first time, real fear cracked through the polish. Her umbrella slipped a little in her grip. She tried to speak, to threaten, but the words stuck. And then, as if on cue, a new sound rose from down the mountain. Engines. Heavy ones. More than one. A convoy grinding up the switchback road, headlights cutting through the rain. Her men turned, staring down the hill. The suits paled, muttering curses under their breath. The guards shifted, uneasy. Madeline's face twisted, eyes darting back to me. "What is that?" one of the suits shouted. I let a small, grim smile curve my lips. "That's the law you've been quoting all night." The engines grew louder, climbing closer, steady as justice. And in that moment, with her fake papers wilting in the rain and my grandfather's map shining like truth under the floodlights, Madeline Cross finally looked small. The sound of those engines climbing the ridge should have been salvation. To Madeline and her crew, it should have been backup, authority, a cavalry charge in the rain. But fate, or maybe something older and meaner than fate, had other plans. The convoy's headlights glowed halfway up the switchback when the night cracked open with a sound older than engines, a deep groaning, a snap like the breaking of God's own bone. Then the thunderous crash of something massive rolling down the mountain. The ridge shook beneath my boots. The floodlights caught the spray of branches, the plume of earth thrown high as a giant white pine gave up its century-long fight with gravity. It slammed across the narrow road below, roots twisting like the tentacles of a drowned beast. Sparks lit the dark as power lines snapped like whips. Then silence, heavy and final. The headlights of the convoy froze, brake lights flaring, trapped. No way forward, no way back. Madeline whipped her head toward me, her perfect mask cracking, water dripping off her face. "What was that?" she demanded, though her voice shook. I let the storm answer for me. The wind roared, rain lashing sideways, thunder rattling the dock. Then I spoke, calm as stone. "That was a pine that's been leaning for a decade. Looks like the storm finally took it. Terrible timing." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring. She was smart enough to see the truth. Storms don't fall trees with such perfect precision. Maybe it was chance, maybe it wasn't. But either way, the result was the same. I gestured down the road with a wet hand. "No way down, and up here." I thumbed toward my cabin, the floodlights blazing, the winch cable still taut against her truck. "No way forward." Boxed in. Her men shifted uncomfortably. The suits looked at each other, panic creeping into their polished faces. They were businessmen, not soldiers. They wanted no part of this. Already I could see the cracks. One raised his hands, already rehearsing excuses. The other took a nervous step toward the glow of approaching flashlights climbing on foot. But Madeline, she wasn't ready to fold. She pulled herself taller, umbrella abandoned in the mud, hair plastered to her forehead. Rage burned through her eyes. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You think some old paper and a fallen tree changes anything? I have the capital. I have the permits. I have the men." She jabbed a finger at me, trembling with fury. "You're finished. One way or another, you're finished." Her last loyal guard took the cue, his hand dropping to his pistol, frustration plain on his face. The storm pounded, the night alive with flashing light and shrieking wind. But his movement was crystal clear. "Don't," I said, voice flat, hard as steel. It wasn't a shout, just a command, and he froze. Because down the slope, voices were echoing through the storm, calm, authoritative, trained. "Sheriff's Department, announce yourselves!" Flashlights cut through the rain, beams bouncing off wet leaves. Justice, slogging through mud and chaos, coming step by step. The investors backed away from Madeline as if she carried the plague. Their hands shot up, their words tumbling out in panicked confessions. "We didn't know. She handled the filings. We thought it was legal." One of the security men lifted his arms too, surrender plain in the way his shoulders sagged. Only Madeline and her hot-headed guard remained defiant, soaked, shivering, caught in the harsh white glow of my floodlights. I stayed by the map, hand resting on my grandfather's work, calm in the storm. "You wanted to play Queen of the Ridge, Madeline, but tonight you're just another trespasser in the mud." Her lips curled, a last shred of arrogance sparking through the fear. But even she knew the board had flipped. The law she'd boasted about was no longer her weapon. It was marching up the hill with cuffs in hand. The storm raged on, the ridge howling with rain and thunder. But inside me, everything went still. The trap had closed, and for the first time since this fight began, I knew the ridge was mine again. The storm hadn't broken. It was still raging, hammering the ridge with wind and rain. But the moment the flashlights crested the hill, the night shifted. Their beams cut through the chaos, steady and searching, voices carrying with authority no thunder could drown out. "Sheriff's Department, hands where we can see them!" Madeline's investors reacted first. Their arms shot into the air like startled schoolboys. One even stumbled forward, tripping in the mud, desperate to reach those lights. "We didn't know!" he shouted, words tumbling over themselves. "She said it was all legal. We were misled." The deputies didn't break stride. Boots sucked at the mud, slickers shining under the floodlights. At their head was Deputy Miller, broad-shouldered, steady, the kind of man carved from this land. I'd known him since I was a kid. He used to drink coffee with my grandfather at the diner every Friday. His gaze swept the scene in one practiced arc. The chained gate, the cable humming with tension, the truck mired in mud, the floodlit cabin, and the miserable cluster of people in the yard. "Evening, Cole," he said, voice calm as if he were just passing me on Main Street. "Evening, Miller," I answered through the porch speaker. My voice rolled across the storm. 2 rounds fired at my siren. Casings by the gate, all on camera. Attempted forced entry, fraudulent survey filed this morning. My sister sent the package. Miller gave the smallest nod. "We got it." He turned, gesturing with his light. 2 deputies moved in, bagging the casings near the gate, photographing the chain. The snapped lock, the mud-churned tire tracks. Everything neat, careful, airtight. Meanwhile, the storm howled, lightning strobing across the ridge, illuminating Madeline Cross like an actress under interrogation lamps. Her umbrella was gone, her red coat plastered to her skin, hair wild around her face. She stood stiff, jaw clenched, her last loyal guard hovering at her side with his side still too close to his weapon. "Ma'am," Miller called, voice sharp, official now, "step away from the gentleman's property line." "This is my property," Madeline snapped, waving her phone like a weapon. "The survey has been filed. The easement—" "Already flagged fraudulent," Miller interrupted, cool as ice. "Recorder's office confirmed it, along with some very interesting documents tying you to Sable Ridge Minerals. You want to keep talking, or you want to wait for a lawyer?" Her face went pale. For the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a soaked, cornered woman. One of the suits broke ranks entirely, nearly running toward Miller. "She filed everything. We just put in money. We want it on record. We didn't authorize any of this." Save it for the DA, Miller said. The smarter of the two guards finally lifted his hands, palms open, voice oily with self-preservation. She hired us for site security, claimed she had a legal order. We were misled, same as them. But the other, Madeline's bulldog, wasn't ready to fold. His hand twitched near the pistol again, the storm hiding nothing. My floodlights gleamed off the wet steel of his holster. Careful, I said through the mic, my voice flat as a slab of granite. Sheriff's deputies really don't like it when you pull a gun in front of them. Makes the paperwork messy. Miller's eyes fixed on the guard. Just one look, the kind of look that carries the weight of a badge and a lifetime in uniform. The guard hesitated, jaw working, then finally lifted his hands. His pistol stayed holstered. That was it. The fight drained out of the yard. Miller stepped forward, boots squelching in the mud. He pulled steel cuffs from his belt, their ratchet loud even in the storm. "Madeline Cross," he said, voice ringing formal, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false documents, criminal trespass, and attempted illegal eviction." The cuffs clicked closed around her wrists. Each metallic snap was final, the storm itself punctuating every word. Her investors recoiled, stepping further away as though shackles were contagious. The guard slumped, relieved almost, as if being out from under her orders was a kind of freedom. Madeline struggled, shoulders jerking, rain streaming down her face. "This isn't over. You don't know who you're dealing with," she shrieked, but the storm swallowed her voice. Miller just tightened his grip on her arm, steady as bedrock, and turned her toward the path. As they led her past the chained gate, she stumbled, nearly falling. The deputy at her side caught her before she went face first into the mud. It was the final humiliation. Once she had strutted here like a conqueror. Now she was just another prisoner, escorted down the hill. The deputies guided the others too, the investors eager to cooperate, the guards mumbling disclaimers. One by one they disappeared into the trees, their flashlights bobbing in the storm. And then it was quiet again. The generator hummed in the garage, the cable still taut against the truck. The floodlights glared across the ruined yard. Rain ran down my face, down my arms, soaking me to the bone, but I felt lighter than I had in months. On the porch, Tess opened the door. She stepped out with a blanket draped around her shoulders, eyes tired but steady. The fight in her had never wavered, but now relief softened her expression. She looked at me, and I looked back. The ridge was ours again. Not legally yet. There would still be hearings, filings, court dates, but the real battle had been fought here, in the mud, under the storm. And we'd held. The law had arrived, not as Madeline imagined, not as her weapon, but as mine. By dawn, the storm had blown itself out. The ridge was quiet again, washed clean, the air sharp with the smell of wet pine and dark earth. Mist clung to the tree line, curling in the hollows like smoke from some invisible fire. For the first time in weeks, I stood on my porch without tension coiled in my chest. The yard was wrecked, mud rutted deep from truck tires, the old iron gate twisted at an ugly angle, broken branches littering the ground. But it was my wreck, our wreck, proof that the ridge was still ours. Tess came out beside me, blanket around her shoulders, her arm looping through mine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. We just stood, breathing in the clean air, watching the sun claw its way over the horizon. The phone buzzed in my pocket. Paige. I put it on speaker. Her voice was bright, energized, even after pulling an all-nighter. "It's over, Cole. For real this time." Tess and I shared a look. "Tell me," I said. "She folded," Paige said with satisfaction. "Madeline cracked in her cell before sunrise. Your investors flipped on her, gave the DA everything. Emails, contracts, bank records. Turns out Sable Ridge Minerals wasn't just a shell company. It was a full-on fraud operation from the start. The DA's office already filed emergency injunctions. The survey, the easement, all of it, null and void. Legally, it never existed." Tess let out a slow breath, her head resting on my shoulder. I closed my eyes, the relief hitting heavier than the storm ever had. "What about the money?" I asked. "Gone," Paige said, almost gleeful. "The DA's forensic accountants traced the funds, straight to offshore accounts in her name. State's seizing every penny. She's not just going to prison, Cole. She's going broke." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The ridge was safe. Not just in the mud and blood sense, but safe on paper, the way my grandfather would have wanted. By mid-morning, word had spread. Small towns have their ways. One text becomes a dozen. One whisper carries farther than any broadcast. My phone lit with messages. Some were apologies. Neighbors who had believed her story about community parks and nature trails saw the truth now. They called me stubborn, paranoid, even hostile, but Madeline had lied to all of them, selling a dream while planning a mine. Eli, the neighbor who'd complained about my floodlights, called first. "Cole," he said awkwardly, "I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. We all should have." He wasn't the only one. Offers rolled in, chainsaws for clearing the fallen pine, trucks for hauling scrap, strong backs for setting the posts of a new gate. They understood now that my fight hadn't been selfish. It was for the ridge itself. For all of them. I walked the property line that afternoon, boots sinking into damp earth, hand brushing the old landmarks. The split oak, the granite boulder, the iron stake my grandfather had driven into the ground. He'd known this ridge wasn't just real estate. It was memory. It was promise. And for the first time in months, that promise felt secure again. Back at the porch, Tess set 2 mugs of coffee on the rail. We stood there in the calm, the steam curling upward in the cool morning. She leaned against me, quiet. "You did it," she whispered. I shook my head, smiling faintly. "We did it. You, me, Paige, even Miller. Madeline thought the law was a weapon to bludgeon us with. She never understood. It can be a shield too, and sometimes a scalpel, cutting out rot clean." The ridge stretched before us, hills rolling green, the lake gleaming silver in the early light. For once, no black trucks waited on the county road. No pink flags scarred the earth. Just quiet, earned quiet. The fight had been long, brutal, and muddy, but we had held. And in the end, the ridge was still ours. By evening, the ridge was quiet in a way it hadn't been for months. No engines, no chains, no floodlights glaring against the storm. Just the slow drip of rain from pine needles, the chorus of frogs down by the creek, and the steady hum of the generator winding down after a long night's work. I sat on the porch steps with a fresh mug of coffee, the steam curling up into the cool air. Tess was inside, finally asleep on the couch. Her hair still damp, but her breathing deep and even. Paige had gone home to rest, after staying awake half the night, feeding information to the sheriff. For the first time since Madeline Cross drove her shiny SUV up this mountain, I felt the weight slide off my shoulders. I thought about my grandfather. I could almost see him leaning against the porch post, arms crossed, watching the ridge with that half smile of his. He built this place with his own 2 hands, and when he was gone, he left me more than a cabin and a few acres. He left me a charge. They don't make more land, Cole. Don't let anyone take it from you. I used to think those words meant holding on to dirt and trees. Now I understood better. It wasn't just the soil, it was the principle. The fight wasn't about one man against a mining company. It was about standing your ground when someone powerful decides you're expendable. It was about refusing to be erased. Madeline thought she could use paperwork like a weapon. She thought signatures and filings could steal what decades of sweat and memory had built. But she never counted on resistance. She never counted on a family that understood both sides of the law, or a community that could wake up fast once they saw the truth. The ridge wasn't just mine. It never was. It belonged to every neighbor who realized they'd almost lost it. It belonged to Tess, who turned a basement workshop into a fortress and never once faltered. It belonged to Paige, who waded into county records like a soldier on the front line. It even belonged to Miller, steady as bedrock, who reminded me that the law can still work when you drag the truth into the light. And maybe, in some quiet way, it belonged to the storm, that wild force that toppled the pine at just the right moment, sealing the trap I'd prepared. Nature itself seemed to say, not here, not this ridge. As the last of the clouds drifted west, the stars came out sharp and bright. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. My yard was torn up, the gate bent, the mud deep. But it was ours. Every scar out there was proof of what we endured, what we defended. I sipped the coffee, listening to the forest breathe. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension in my jaw, no coiled spring in my chest. Just quiet. Hard-earned, well-deserved quiet. How far will a man go to defend his home? I knew the answer now, as far as it takes. Not because the land itself is priceless, but because of what it represents. Memory, legacy, the promise that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The ridge will outlast me, just like it outlasted my grandfather. But tonight, under the clean sky, I knew this much. It was safe. It was free. And for as long as I drew breath, it would stay that way. Tess stirred inside, mumbling in her sleep. I set down my empty mug and went to join her. The fight was over. Tomorrow would bring repairs, court dates, rebuilding. But tonight, the ridge was quiet. Ours. And that was enough.